إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Praise be to Allah. We seek His help and His forgiveness. We seek refuge with Allah from the evil of our own souls and from our bad deeds. Whomsoever Allah guides will never be led astray, and whomsoever Allah leaves astray, no one can guide. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, the one having no partner, and I bear witness that Muhammad is His slave and His messenger. I will just ask everyone if they could please mute themselves. اللهم علمني الكتاب والحكمة وفقهني في الدين. Oh Allah, teach me the book and wisdom and grant me understanding of the religion. اللهم إني أسألك علما نافعا ورزقا طيبا وعملا متقبلا. Oh Allah, I ask you for beneficial knowledge, goodly provision and acceptable deeds. Ameen. So today, inshallah, we'll be beginning with the surah of Surah Al-Kafiroon, the disbelievers, inshallah. So as I usually do, I will introduce the surah with a bit of background knowledge, but before I do, I will just recite the surah normally, and then I will recite it again at the end, but slower and pausing after each ayah. And I want you to ponder and think about what you learned from this surah, inshallah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. قل يا أيها الكافرون لا أعبد ما تعبدون ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد ولا أنا عابد ما عبدتم ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد لكم دينكم ولي دين. So what we'll do now is we'll delve into each verse by verse of the surah, inshallah. The background to this surah is very important, and actually for every surah in the Quran, because just want to remind you all, it helps you to connect with the surah. Most people don't realize that the verses of the Quran came down as a response to people's questions. The Quran was there to resolve disputes, to reprimand someone that did something wrong. People are under the assumption, unfortunately, that the Quran was just revealed in chapters in order for memorization purposes without any connection to the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. But it's actually not correct. All of the surahs are connected. It's like one big story. And there's a reason for every single verse being revealed. So I do apologize that sometimes the explanation of the background of this surah, sometimes it actually takes longer than the tafseer of the surah. But trust me, this background information, it's going to stick in your mind and it's going to help you stay connected to the Quran, inshallah. And then when you have a background knowledge of a surah, when you're about to say the surah in salah or at any time, you immediately remember the whole background. Okay, so this chapter is Meccan. I would recommend if you would like to write this all down, and I can also send the PDFs, inshallah. So this chapter is Meccan, and it consists of 6 verses. So remember, we said that Meccan verses means that the verses were revealed before Hijrah. And the main audience is the non-Muslims. Okay, it's not the Muslims, because in Medina, the majority of the audience were the Muslims. But in Mecca, it was the pagans and other non-Muslims. So Meccan verses do not contain laws and what's halal and what's haram, and verses of the hijab were not revealed in Mecca, but they're aimed at bringing people towards Islam and also, just strengthening the iman of the new Muslims. Because just because someone became a Muslim, it doesn't mean that they are very, very strong in their Islam. What's needed is verses as well to strengthen them. It is sunnah to recite Surah Al-Kafiroon in the first ruk'ah of your Sunnah Al-Fajr, and then Surah Al-Ikhlas in the second ruk'ah of Sunnah Al-Fajr. I noticed that there's both a relatively very short surahs, both Surah Al-Kafiroon, Surah Al-Ikhlas, which would be suitable to read when you just wake up and you're a little bit out of it. You know, Allah doesn't require of us that as soon as we wake up for the sunnah that we recite long verses. It's sunnah to recite long verses in the actual fajr, salah, the fard. But in the sunnah, we recite Surah Al-Kafirun, Surah Al-Ikhlas, very, very short surahs. And notice that, subhanAllah, these two surahs, they're mainly about declaring Allah's oneness and establishing that, yes, I'm a Muslim, I believe in one God. You know, it's like saying, as soon as you wake up, the first thing that you need to remind yourself is, you know, Allah is one. Very, very short surahs, these two. I wanted to remind you as well that at this point when the surah was being revealed, Mecca was still inhabited by both Muslims and non-Muslims. Not like we see today, you know, Mecca, you know, and Medina, it's completely all Muslims. That wasn't the case many years back. So the polytheists were praying in the direction of the Kaaba, and so were the Muslims. You know, they were praying to the direction of the Kaaba as well. And usually when you see a group of people all praying towards one thing, you assume that they're all from the same religion, right? Like if you see people going in a church and praying in a church, you're going to assume that they're all Christians, right? However, in Mecca, the Kaaba was a central place of religious significance for more than one religion. So it's important that we differentiate, you know, people, we needed to differentiate between the beliefs, you know, the beliefs of all the people that were worshipping there. So what inspired the revelation of this surah exactly? What is it that inspired it? Did something happen for this surah to be revealed? Now, for years, the Quraysh tried to stop the Prophet ﷺ from conveying the message of Islam. So they tried to threaten the Prophet and his followers. He would kill some of the followers. He would torture some of the followers. We all know, you know, the story of Bilal, how he was forced to lie down on the boiling hot sand and a big rock was placed on him. And he was tortured so that he can give up the religion of Islam, but he didn't. But then when the disbelievers realized that we're not really getting anywhere, like the Muslims are not actually giving up their religion. In fact, Islam was slowly but steadily, it was actually growing. So they thought to themselves, what should we do? Let's try another method. Because when you try a method and it doesn't work, you have to try another method. It's like, for example, if your child is very, very disobedient, can you think, okay, the best way to discipline him or her is to hit them, okay? You might try that way and then you realize, okay, it's not really working. So let me try another way. So that's what we have to do sometimes. If a way does not work, we need to research into what is about, you know, a better way of achieving our purpose and our goal. So their new approach was trying to find some common grounds to get, you know, a little bit of compromise happening, a little bit of tolerance, you know, hopefully we can get a little bit of, you know, peace happening, you know, for now anyway. They thought, let's try to see if we have some common grounds so we can agree on something. So the Quraysh, they agreed to compromise in their ways and in their worship. They said if the Prophet ﷺ would also compromise in the way he worshipped, we would compromise in the way that we worshipped. So they were actually happy to worship Allah the way that Muhammad worshipped Allah for a couple of days, doing salah the exact same way prescribed in Islam, you know, directed to Allah alone, so long as Muhammad agreed to do a few prayers with the Quraysh towards their idols. And subhanAllah, when you hear about this, it makes you realize how they didn't really believe in their religion. Because a person that really, really believed in their religion, they would never, ever agree to worship another religion for any reason. But that's what they wanted to do. They just wanted to have an interfaith relationship. You know, we'll agree to do some, you know, things like you know, like one big happy family, and all the religions are getting along, and you know, we'll participate in each other's acts of worship. So they actually specifically asked Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam if he would worship their gods or their idols for a year and will worship Allah alone the next year. How about that? How does that sound? They were even willing to allow Muhammad to be part of their council, like the council in the decision making, and to give him a high position. They offered him so much money. They said that we will make you the richest person in Mecca. And they offered him to give you the most beautiful woman in marriage. He was married already, but even prior to Islam, people were married more than 4. Like, it was actually, people would marry an unnumbered amount of women. So Islam came to actually limit that number to 4 as a maximum, because prior to Islam, people married 10, 20, 30. It didn't matter how many number of women they married. They married many, many women. Anyway, the Prophet ﷺ rejected the offer, and this actually really made them angry. It enraged them more. They're like, who would reject such a tempting offer? They were like literally throwing money at the Prophet and offering him political power. But he didn't agree. He just wouldn't budge. So you see, to the Quraysh, religion and worship was politics and money. It wasn't a way of life like us. It wasn't a greater need of the soul and a journey to the afterlife that doesn't have an economic value. To them, religion was all about politics, power, and money. This is their whole belief system. So it was at this point that the Surah Al-Kafiroon was revealed. So this brings us to the tafsir of the surah. Now we'll go to each verse by verse, inshallah. So here we go. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. Say, O disbelievers. So in previous surahs, we said that the word qul means what? See if you can actually remember, because some of these words I mentioned over and over again. There's actually a book that you can purchase online that it has the most common words in the Quran. And the author says that if you memorize these common words, not many words, there's a couple there. If you memorize them, you'll understand the gist of the Quran, because a lot of these words are used over and over again. They're like sight words. Like, as soon as you see them, you will know how to read them and you will know what they mean. And this is one of them. One of the words is qul. The word qul means say. It also means proclaim. So Allah is addressing Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to address the Quraysh and call them, Kafiroon, which means disbelievers. Okay. And another thing I wanted to bring to your attention is the word kufr, the meaning of kufr and kafir and kafirun, which all comes from the same word. Okay. The most common meaning that we Muslims know of kufr or kafir is disbeliever. Okay. But when you look into the Arabic language grammatically and how the word kafir is used in other places in the Quran, it also has another meaning. It means the one who is ungrateful. That's like the actual meaning of kafir. It means the one who is ungrateful. So in fact, the disbelievers are called kafir. They're given that title, kafir, because they, denied that Allah is their Lord, and them worshipping other lords, other gods other than Allah is an act of ingratitude. So that's why they're called kafir, because they implement the meaning, which means the person, the one who is ungrateful. So, okay, this is what they were called. Allah is telling Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, address them. قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ. O disbelievers, the ungrateful ones. So imagine after all these years, for example, of your mother raising you and taking care of you, because I want you to imagine like what kufr means, Imagine that you denied your mother's maternity and you started giving gifts to some other lady and you started praising some other lady for raising you, and you called her your mom, although she didn't raise you and your mom raised you. Okay, so similarly, I'm trying to get a message, across that the disbelievers are called kuffar, which means the ungrateful ones. They're an ingrate, which is the person who is not grateful for the good that has been done to them. They're not grateful. Allah gave them ears and eyes and wealth, and what are they doing? They're either denying Allah's existence altogether, which is the atheist, or they're not sure what their religion is, or they're worshipping the wrong God, So this is why they're given that name. So here Allah is telling the Prophet ﷺ to call them, "O ungrateful ones who disbelieve in the truth." It's quite a strong and a direct way of directing his own people. Imagine you directing your own people and calling them, "Oh, ungrateful ones." In fact, the Prophet ﷺ is not saying, "Oh, my people." In other places in the Quran, he says, "Ya qawmi." Okay, he's saying, "Oh, disbelievers," and this can be somewhat offensive towards a person who's not a Muslim, to call them a disbeliever, a person who doesn't have faith, because they consider themselves believers, like believers in the sense not of Islam, like they consider themselves believers in their own religion, not disbelievers. They believed in their idols for a long time. The Prophet ﷺ, he used very kind ways of addressing these non-Muslims. However, now when they were adamant that they're not going to enter Islam, because they made it now very, very clear that we are not going to enter Islam, the Prophet ﷺ began to be stern, because that's how it is. Usually you are very lenient, you're very kind, and then when push comes to shove, and then you realize, okay, this is not getting anywhere, I'm going to have to be very, very stern. So the Prophet ﷺ had to make it very, very clear. Looks like we have two completely different beliefs. We have parted our ways. I've got nothing to do with you. You have nothing to do with me. So pretty much this surah is making a very important distinction, telling the kuffar, the polytheists, the Quraysh in particular, very sternly that, listen, we're not the same. Okay, just because we have some family connection, we are not the same at all. Yes, we may be from the same tribe. Yes, we may have the same family. And just because we're facing the same direction in worship, towards the Kaaba, it doesn't mean that we have anything in common. Next verse. لا أعبد ما تعبدون. I do not worship what you worship. So after calling them disbelievers, the Prophet ﷺ is commanded to say to them, look, we do not worship the same God, nor will we ever worship that which you are worshiping. You're worshiping idols. No matter what, we've left that practice. There's no way we're going to worship that. No matter what you offer, no matter what family or tribe we have in common, I will never ever be worshiping your idols. They're made out of stone. They have no power to bring good or harm. I won't do it. So the way that the Prophet ﷺ is addressing the Quraysh, he's going to now anger the Quraysh. Because before he was actually walking on eggshells. Okay, he was very careful, calling them, Ya qawmi, oh my people. But now the way he's addressing the disbelievers, you're going to have to expect that they're going to get angry now. It's going to enrage them, and they're going to become even meaner and harsher towards the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. But it was all part of Allah's divine plan. Sometimes things get really worse before they get better. And I think we can see what's happening in Gaza now. This is very similar. Sometimes things have to get really, really bad before they get better. So the Prophet ﷺ had to prepare himself for things to get really, really worse, because things were not going to be any better, unfortunately, until things got worse. Next verse. وَلَا أَنْتُمْ عَابِدُونَ مَا أَعْبُدُ. Nor do you worship what I worship. So remember that these words are not Muhammad's words. They are words of Allah. Allah is telling them, the Quraysh, that you will never agree to worship Allah. You will never become Muslims. So this wouldn't be suitable for a Muslim to say these words to a disbeliever, because Only Allah knows if they will ever enter Islam, because they might enter Islam and they might become better Muslim than you and I. And it's not our right to say this because we don't know the future, correct? However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who knows the past and the present, He, Allah, is addressing the Quraysh that you will never worship Allah. You will never accept Islam. And Allah doesn't want and doesn't need, He doesn't want temporary worship. He doesn't want fake worship for them to put a show for the world. That's not what Allah wants. Allah wants worship sincerely to Him. And this agreement that they offered to worship Allah for a year, it was not a sincere offer. It was actually a business deal. So when you think about what they were offering, they were actually offering a business deal because they knew that they were going to be economically suffering a lot if Islam grew. Because remember we said if Islam grew, then all the people that come to worship all these idols around the Kaaba, they're not going to be coming anymore, and bringing in money and economic growth into the country. The Meccans, they knew that. So what did they want? They thought, okay, let's do a deal. Instead of him taking over, let's make a deal so that at least 1 year we get economic growth and another year we don't get economic growth. Slide 6. Okay, verse 4. وَلَا أَنَا عَابِدٌ مَا عَبَدتُّمْ. Nor do I worship what you worship. Now, again, it's being emphasized again that I will not worship any of the idols that you worship. And this verse is pretty much re-emphasizing what's mentioned in verse 2. And as we know, sometimes we need to repeat ourselves many times for us to be taken seriously. Okay? And I'm sure as mothers, you know that sometimes you'll say something once, twice, 3, 4 times until someone takes you really, really seriously. Okay? And this is what's happening. And in the Quran, many times verses are repeated over and over. And it's not there to fill up the word count of the Quran. It's there for emphasis. So this is what's happening in the surah. Repetition. Verses and important pieces of information are being repeated. It's being made clear as black and white that the Muslims will never, ever worship what the pagans worship. And there are numerous places in the Quran, where the same verse is repeated over and over again in a surah to re-emphasize something that's really important. And I'll give you an example. In Surah Al-Rahman, Allah repeats a verse, فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ 24 times in that surah. Like one verse it's this, one verse it's that same ayah. Another verse, and then the verse after it's فَبِأَيِّ آلَاءِ رَبِّكُمَا تُكَذِّبَانِ, which means, so which of your Lord's favors will you deny? Like over and over again. And also in Surah Al-Mursalat, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَيْلُ يَوْمَئِذٍ لِلْمُكَذِّبِينَ. Woe to the disbelievers on that day, the ones who reject, over and over again. So this is the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts repetition to re-emphasize and stress a very, very important point. And in addition to these examples, I wanted to remind you that the word salah is mentioned 99 times in the Quran. So like I said, repetition is what? Is for emphasis. Look how many times the word salah is mentioned in the Quran. Allah doesn't only remind His servant of the need to perform the prayer, but to establish the prayer and then do the physical actions of the prayer at certain times. And then Allah reminds us to do this over and over again throughout the Quran. And the reason for this is because as humans, we forget. Or we know and we know, but we just need like a reminder. A little bit of a push, a bit of motivation and encouragement to keep us going. And for that reason, Allah uses the method of repetition when commanding us to pray. And this is why if you have children and they grow up and you've taught them how to pray, don't ever think that khalas, if they heard the adhan clock in the house, that's it. They should be praying. It's not your responsibility and you've just left them. You still remind them. You still encourage them. But what better way to encourage them than to pray in jama'ah. A lot of mothers, they complain that their children are not praying, for example. And we say, okay, do you pray together? Do you try to implement that? Obviously, we can't do that 5 times a day. They're at school at times. But do you at least try to do it like once when they come home from school? Like, okay, everyone, get changed. We're all going to pray now. Maghrib. Yeah, do you pray together? Or everyone, yep, everyone's time to pray, and then you leave them, and then you assume that they prayed, or maybe they didn't pray at all, you know. So our duty is to remind our family to pray. So we can see that repetition is required at times, and I'm sure that as parents you've experienced it, and you know, you repeated yourselves over and over again so that someone can actually take you seriously. وَلَا أَنْتُمْ عَابِدُونَ مَا أَعْبُدُ, nor do you worship what I worship. Now, notice this verse number 5, is identical to verse number 3. And if you want, you can open it up on the Quran and have a look at it, because these two, like these verses in the position of the Quran, they're kind of like on top of each other. And you'll see that the exact same layout. So these two verses, number 3 and number 5, are the same verse exactly. So a lot of people that are, you know, this sort of, a lot of people, after they memorize it, it's really hard to retain, and they keep getting mixed up. So I always tell them, okay, open up the Quran and just look how number 3 and number 5 are exactly the same. And then you can kind of count using your fingers to remind yourself, okay, number 3 is this ayah, and then number 5 is this same exact ayah. Just a little tip for you. Remember when I said that in the introduction that the kuffar were trying to make an agreement, to make a compromise with the Prophet ﷺ, and they would say, how about, you know, we'll worship your Lord this many days and you worship our Lord this many days, and the Prophet ﷺ rejected that. Then they would say, okay, how about this, you know, how about that, how about this, how about that? Okay, you don't want to worship our God for a whole year. What about we worship your God for a year and you worship our God for 6 months? No. Okay, how about we worship your God for a year and you worship our God for 1 month? No. How about we worship your Lord for a year and you just worship our Lord for one week? So they kept on going back, forth, trying to make compromises in order to make some sort of agreement, right? And what we see here in this verse, that there is being a repetition, like I said, 3 and 5 are exactly the same. And it's like Allah is telling them, just like you came back and forth, I'm telling you now over and over again, the same thing, it ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen. This is why this verse is repeated again, number 3 and number 5. Allah is commanding the Prophet ﷺ to repeat to them again and again, look, don't bother. I'm not going to worship the gods that you worship, not for a day, not for a week, not for a month, no matter what you offer me. So stop making these offers and stop asking me to compromise in my religion. It's not going to happen. Lakum dinukum waliya din. Look, you have your way and I have my way. So finally, this surah concludes after all this repetition and going back and forth and back and forth. Let's just agree that we have 2 separate beliefs. It's, you know how people say, let's agree to disagree? It's the same exact thing. You do your thing and I do mine. There's no compulsion in religion anyway. Allah says, La ikraha fi din. There is no compulsion in religion. In Islam, we are not allowed to force someone to become a Muslim in the first place, ever. We are supposed to give them dawah, and we have to show them the truth, and we are to encourage them and show them a good example, but we are not allowed to force someone to become a Muslim, because this makes it where a person accepts Islam out of force, and it's not really sincere. And that's not what Islam encourages. We don't encourage fake Muslims. It's not about the number. It's the quality, not the quantity. So everyone makes their own choices in life, and each person, they needs to deal with the consequences related to the decisions that they make. In life, you need to make decisions, okay? And you will need to deal with the consequences. So if you prayed in this dunya, you have the consequences in the akhirah, which is a reward. If you didn't pray in this dunya, then you will deal with the consequences in the akhirah. And that's being shocked that you are not, really a Muslim. If you wore correct hijab in this dunya, then in the akhirah, your hijab will shield you and will save you from the nar jahannam, the fire of hell. If you didn't wear hijab or you didn't wear proper hijab, then you will need to face Allah with Allah telling you, why did you not follow my laws? So in life, everyone deals with their own consequences for their own actions in the akhirah. So they decided, the disbelievers, to be ungrateful to Allah and to worship other gods. Then they will be the beneficiary of their kufr. They will have to pay the price in the afterlife, and it will be no one's fault but theirs. Sometimes it's really hard to see people that you love making the wrong decisions. Sometimes it's your own family. Sometimes it's your best friend or work colleague or someone that you're really close to, and it hurts you that, they're making such bad decisions. But imagine the Prophet ﷺ, being in his shoes, his own uncle, who he loved so much, who he raised him like he was his own son, and he never accepted Islam. So, yeah, in a nutshell, this surah denounces all gods other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as Muslims, we are disassociating ourselves from the beliefs of the disbelievers. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to recite the surah again, but I'm going to recite it slowly, and I'm going to pause after every verse. And I just want you to please think about what these verses are and try to make a connection about why verse number 3 and 5 are the same verse. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. قل يا أيها الكافرون لا أعبد ما تعبدون ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد ولا أنا عابد ما عبدتم ولا أنتم عابدون ما أعبد لكم دينكم ولي دين. So Jazakallah khair everyone for logging in and benefiting from this surah. Please make dua for me and for your family and my family, and please do not forget to make dua for the people in Gaza. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.